who maintained the balance of truth in a banker's ledger tainted with blood and secrets. I'm Freddie, and I'm your host on Detective Echoes. For where are you watching? Leave a remark and participate in the discussion. I'm eager to read your thoughts because they add depth to this story. Let's solve the mystery now. Even Hercule Poirot would have been thrilled with the exact arrangement of the silverware. Like soldiers awaiting inspection, each fork nestled evenly on fine linen, while each knife shone in the light from the chandelier. It was the final dinner that the late Charles D. Norwood, director of Norwood and Penhaligon Bank, would ever host, and it was the sort of order that calmed his senses. Mr. Norwood sat at the head of the table in the stance of a man who ruled over empires, even if those empires were limited to private ledgers and decimal points. 6 people gathered around him, chit-chatting courteously and making light-hearted jokes about interest rates, vacations in Venice, and the increasingly uncommon art of handwritten letters. The meal, which included an Alsatian Riesling and braised duck with orange glaze, was flawless. Co-partner in the bank and heir to a defunct shipping fortune, Miss Claudia Penhaligon fiddled with her wineglass. She frequently looked across the table with an unreadable expression. The bank's ambitious junior partner, Richard Ellesmere, sat next to her. He was too young, tense, and eager to be friendly. Lydia Norwood, his younger second wife, sat to his right, dressed in long silences and velvet sleeves. Harold Pritchard, the calm and perceptive family solicitor, was to his left. Colonel Godfrey March, who had just returned from Ceylon, was standing opposite the solicitor and appeared mildly disinterested in everyone and everything. An interruption, not coffee, marked the end of the lunch. The group was startled by the sound of glass smashing from the corridor. Norwood stood as chairs scraped against tile. With the clipped authority of a man who isn't used to being asked questions, he ordered, "Stay here." He never came back. 10 minutes later, Richard Ellesmere discovered him lying on the Persian carpet in the study. Several feet away was a paperweight, made of solid brass and formed like a little globe. It hadn't rolled. It was impressive how quickly the police arrived, but not how tactful they were. Felix Hargrove, a thick-set inspector from the Surrey Constabulary, was the inspector in command and didn't have much patience for intricacy. "No forcible entrance," he yelled. No one took anything. The butler and maid confirmed that all 6 of the dinner guests were present in the dining room when the glass shattered. "Someone has to be inside. A circle that is closed." Poirot read the note that Inspector Hargrove had scrawled in a hurry and sent by special courier 2 hours later while he was sitting in a battered leather armchair in his apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot was not yet interested in the crime's method, but rather in the last paragraph's wording. "I understand that a person of your caliber would typically not be interested in such a little matter, Monsieur Poirot." The victim kept a private ledger of non-financial matters and wrote daily memos to himself, but his accounts were oddly detailed. "We recently discovered it. The ledger contains 3 names at the end. They're not his dinner guests." Poirot went over the note one more time. He focused on the unfitting detail rather than the murder. The unspoken names, the confidential ledger, and the shattered glass. A sound too staged, too dramatic. He got up, took out his walking stick, and rearranged his tie so that it sat exactly as he wanted it. The drizzle had started by the time he got on the train to Surrey. Condensation clouded the windows. Constantly careful, Poirot used his handkerchief to wipe a clear circle into the glass before looking out thoughtfully. He whispered, "An old banker doesn't write names for nothing." He also realized that he had a reason for dying. Like an elderly man settling into a chair, the train's brakes sighed as it slipped silently into the station at Frimley. Hercule Poirot carefully descended from the container, his patent leather shoes barely making contact with the damp platform. The drizzle had changed to a gentle, lingering mist that was curling over the peaceful countryside like breath. Near the exit, a constable stood with a wet notebook, looking around as if half expecting Poirot to appear in disguise. Poirot gave his hat a tip. "Yes, you were expecting me." "Yes, sir. According to Inspector Hargrove, you should arrive at 7:10. This way." Norwood's estate was reached in a short and uneventful trip. The car's tires crunched on the gravel drive. As they neared the mansion, Poirot observed its dark, early Victorian, ivy-clad structure, which was well-maintained yet strangely chilly. In the lower rooms, lights were burning, and Poirot noted privately that none of the windows had their curtains open, a home unaccustomed to openness. Inspector Hargrove, his trench coat undone and his face furrowed with patience, greeted him in the lobby. He shook the detective's gloved hand and remarked, "Thank you for coming, Poirot. I understand that this isn't the kind of extravagant event you typically host, but something doesn't feel quite right." Gently, Poirot folded his gloves together and took them off. "Murder is never great, mon ami. It is always depressing and vile. But I'm intrigued by what you say. You brought up a ledger." Hargrove guided him down the corridor to Norwood's now-restored and peaceful study. The carpet had been cleaned of the bloodstains. It seemed as though the brass paperweight had never left the desk. Hargrove pointed to a walnut armoire in the corner and stated, "We found it in the locked cabinet there. Inside is a handwritten private notebook. Personal observations, he called it." Poirot himself opened the cabinet, sweeping past a stack of financial journals and a collection of unused pipes. The leather-bound notebook lay on top of a bundle of twine-tied letters. He flipped to the last page. 3 names. They were all underlined. Mrs. Avi Brentwood Thomas Derin Valsin, M. No background? Poirot inquired. Not a single one. Earlier in the book, they are not mentioned. Only those names and the date, 3 days prior to his passing. Poirot narrowed his eyes at the meticulous handwriting as he studied the page. He took his time writing these. He didn't do this out of fear. This is a deliberative situation. Well, observation. Not warning, though. However, it's still early. Hargrove folded his arms. "We have investigated them. Living close to the north of the tram line is Mrs. Avis Brentwood, a widow. Daring, a young clerk, used to work with Norwood. Valsin is challenging, a Swiss-French investor who was once on the bank's client list but is no longer listed. And none of these individuals attended the dinner. Not one." Slowly, as if to confirm something to himself, Poirot nodded. "I'll begin with the widow after that." Nestled between hedges and a tight turn in the tram line was the modest stone home of Mrs. Avis Brentwood. Like a woman who used to care intensely, but now merely takes care of the necessities, the garden was overgrown but well kept. She let Poirot in before he could knock. With a clipped voice and direct eyes, she stated, "You're not the inspector." "No, ma'am. Hercule Poirot is who I am. Could I enter?" She paused just a second. Then, with a shrug of exhaustion or disinterest, she turned and left him to shut the door before entering the sitting area. The interior had a subtle scent of coal smoke and lavender. A tiny electric fire was humming. A faded picture of a man in uniform stood on the mantel. Poirot took his seat as instructed. "Mr. Norwood, you knew?" Her hands were clasped in her lap. "I was aware of him. We had a mutual acquaintance. Through his bank, my late husband made investments. That's all. However, your name, along with 2 others, was discovered in one of his private ledgers." She blinked. "Once. A ledger?" Poirot kept a close eye on her. "Indeed. The list was handwritten. It was yours initially. Why that would be, I don't know." "Are you sure, ma'am?" With a start, she got up and walked over to the window. "What is the significance of certainty? He worked as a banker. He penned names. He might have written everyone's names." "Not all of them, ma'am. Just 3. A flicker of uneasiness appeared in her reflection in the glass. Poirot got up slowly. "Have you ever had a private meeting with Mr. Norwood?" "I might have. A few years back. Maybe something to do with your husband's affairs." She pivoted. A tone of steel accompanied the softening of her voice. "After the war, my husband committed suicide. He entrusted our savings to someone. That confidence was lost." Poirot bent a little. "My sympathies." She went back to her chair, but she didn't sit down. "Do you mean that, Monsieur Poirot? For the time being?" He started for the door, but stopped, taking another look at the picture on the mantel. "I don't think of you as a woman who betrays her trust twice." That's why he left her. When they returned to the estate, Poirot refused to eat. Rather, he strolled about the house beneath a canopy, pausing frequently to watch and reflect. They had already replaced the pane of glass that had broken the night of the murder. Poirot, however, examined the area. Under the sill was a big pot of gardenias. The pot had just been moved and then put back, as shown by a dry patch in the dirt underneath. Poirot muttered. Ah. A sound was desired by someone, not a doorway. He went back inside and asked to see the guest list once more. One lies with silence, Poirot whispered as Hargrove retrieved it. Another that makes noise. On the study desk, a second glass of water remained unopened. He gestured toward it. After the police left, Hargrove asked, "Who drank from this glass?" "No one," said Hargrove. Poirot made contact with the rim. Then someone came back. He gave a small smile. Notes were taken by the banker. However, the criminal created noise. Poirot was once again in front of the towering Norwood and Penhaligon Bank facade the morning after his visit to Mrs. Brentwood. With its stone columns and etched glass windows that bore witness to innumerable transactions, betrayals, and secrets, the imposing building towered over the street with a sense of distant dignity. It was the type of setting where reputations were carefully preserved and fortunes were balanced, but where, as Poirot was aware, everything could be overturned by a single whispered lie. Inside, the piercing ring of telephones and the occasional yelled command were interspersed with the hum of clerks and the shuffle of papers. As befitted a place where privacy was of the utmost importance, Poirot's entrance was observed but unremarked upon. Richard Ellesmere was waiting for him in a small office with wood paneling. The young man stood up quickly and held out a hand that shook a little. "Mr. I know you were there the night of Mr. Norwood's sad death," Ellesmere, Poirot said in his calm voice. "Monsieur Poirot, I agree. Yes, I was." The experience was startling. Ellesmere swallowed uneasily. "I only wish there was something I could have done." Poirot's eyes glistened with mild irony as he said, "Yes. However, you are here because the situation calls for an explanation, just like the others. I'll ask you to be completely honest." Ellesmere nodded, but his tenseness was evident from the tremble in his fingers. "Explain your connection to Mr. Norwood to me. He served as my mentor for many years. Just be a stern man. He gave me a lot of financial and life lessons. However, there has been friction lately. Under pressure, the bank had to make difficult decisions." "Already, monsieur." "Indeed. A few investments had lost their appeal. We might lose." Divergent opinions prevailed regarding the best course of action. To maintain a perfect image, some people wanted to hide it. Others, such as Mr. Norwood, demanded truthfulness. Poirot nodded as he listened intently. "And what part do you play?" "I was given the responsibility of discreetly managing a few accounts to safeguard the interests of the bank. Even if I didn't agree with commands, I was told not to question them." "Have you ever asked a question?" "In my head only, monsieur. I followed orders." Poirot's eyes grew piercing. "Did you observe any odd behavior from the other visitors that night?" Ellesmere paused. Mrs. Penhaligon was there. She appeared aloof and preoccupied. Mrs. Norwood, on the other hand, remained quiet for the majority of the evening. With the exception of the time, she almost spilled her wine on the carpet. "Ah, Poirot murmure. The greatest truths are often revealed by the smallest details." He hesitated, thinking, how was the paperweight doing? Ellesmere took a swallow. When the glass shattered, I was close to the study. When I hurried in, I discovered Mr. Norwood lying down. The paperweight was lying close by. However, I couldn't see who threw it." Poirot raised his brows. "Naturally, no one confesses to tossing a paperweight. Was the sound intentional, though?" "Indeed." Everyone was taken aback. And then, anarchy. The police were called by the butler. Visitors were restricted to the dining area. Poirot wrote something down in his notebook. "I am grateful, Monsieur Ellesmere. We value your candor." Ellesmere stood up with a hint of relief. Poirot leaned back and thought. Despite the plausibility of the young man's story, Poirot's tiny gray cells tingled with skepticism. Below the surface, there was more, a crack in the story. Then he asked to see Lydia Norwood, Mrs. He was welcomed by the banker's younger wife in a drawing room with thick draperies and gilt frames. Her eyes were keen, her posture graceful but reserved. "I know this is a tough moment, madam." Her mouth quirked slightly. "It's challenging and draining." Poirot became softer. I'd like to ask some questions, if you don't mind. For the sake of clarity. She bowed her head. How did you and your late husband get along? Difficult, she said. I cared for him, even though we had our disagreements. And on that particular evening, I mostly kept quiet. The strain was intolerable. The pretenses and the business wore me out. Poirot examined her. You appeared preoccupied during dinner. She gave a gentle shrug. Well, I guess. I didn't want to be at that gathering. Did you want to see someone else instead? Her eyes blinked. You shouldn't be concerned about that. But it might be pertinent. She paused. Someone, an old acquaintance, was present. However, that is the past. Poirot observed the fleeting moment of emotion before his coolness returned. What about the paperweight? She gave the mantelpiece a quick look. The crash startled me. Who threw was hidden from me. I was on the other side of the table. Before the incident, were you able to hear raised voices? No, nothing. Just courteous dialogue. Others, however, had told Poirot otherwise. He stood up and extended his hand. I'm grateful, Madame Norwood. The young wife's eyes lingered on the door as he walked away, possibly considering her next course of action. Colonel Godfrey March, whose military demeanor concealed a restless mind, would be Poirot's next interview subject. Poirot approached the convoluted center of the enigma with each step, where the shadows thickened and the whispering became louder. When Poirot entered the drawing room, Colonel Godfrey March was already there. The former officer exuded the detached demeanor that results from years of leading others and having discipline ingrained in one's being. His dark eyes looked at Poirot with mild contempt and curiosity, as if the Belgian detective's methods were still a mystery, but his reputation had reached him. Stiffly nodding, the colonel said, Monsieur Poirot, I guess you're also here to question me. Yes, Colonel. We will be very grateful for your cooperation. Have a seat, please. March put his hands on his knees and sank into the high-backed chair. Yes, I was present at the meal. I have to say that I thought the atmosphere was a little tense. Poirot gave a soft smile. Don't you believe that a meal often serves as a stage for the wearing of many masks? It's true enough. I saved mine for combat. That is commendable. What is your relationship with Mr. Norwood? May I ask? March looked away for a second. I was a customer. All we had was respect for one another. Did you know about the recent conflicts at the bank? Just in passing. I'm not into finance. I work in strategy, not statistics. And the evening of the homicide? When the glass shattered, were you close to the study? No. Mrs. Penhaligon and I were talking. She appeared distracted. Did you observe any oddities in her actions? March paused. She's always aloof, making calculations. However, that night, she seemed distressed. Poirot listened intently. Did you witness Mr. Ellesmere's response to the incident? Mostly shock, but something else too, maybe fear. Poirot gave a contemplative nod. And you? Were you afraid? March's face grew serious. I sensed that suspicion descended on all of us. What about the paperweight? The weapon? The colonel chuckled softly. A blunt tool for a blunt individual. None of us probably anticipated such thing. But it was used, and for a reason. The colonel squinted his eyes. Purpose, yes, but I can't say by whom. Poirot got up. I'm grateful, Colonel March. We value your candor. Later on in the day, Poirot was by himself in the darkened study, poring over Norwood's private ledger. Financial jargon mixed with unusual markings in the margins, including cryptic references to debts, favors, and, most intriguingly, a series of initials next to amounts marked settled. The handwriting was crisp and exact. He circled several entries with a careful hand. Frequently, the initials AB were seen next to oddly large amounts. Could this be Mrs. Avis Brentwood's code? He was startled by a knock at the door. It was Harold Pritchard, the family solicitor, a man whose calm exterior belied a sharp mind. Monsieur Poirot, I hope you're getting better. Indeed, Monsieur Pritchard. I was just analyzing Mr. Norwood's accounts. May I ask, do you know anything of these initials? AB? The solicitor's lips twitched into a faint smile. Miss Brentwood, no doubt. She's a client of my firm as well. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. Interesting that her name appears so often in Mr. Norwood's private ledger. Pritchard shrugged. In financial matters, appearances can be deceiving. Just so. As they spoke, Poirot's eyes flicked to a faint smudge on the ledger's corner. A fingerprint smudged, but present. He tapped it lightly. Did you touch these pages recently? Merely to retrieve the ledger. Pritchard replied evenly. Poirot did not press further. He thanked the solicitor and retired to his hotel room. The evening brought with it a restless quiet. The rain had returned, tapping against the window like a soft drum roll, and Poirot found himself staring at the delicate folds of his handkerchief. He mused aloud. Each man and woman at that table carries secrets, some financial, some far more personal. The ledger is a map, but the true path lies in the hearts and minds of those who gathered. He closed his eyes, imagining the dinner once more, the polite smiles, the nervous glances, the quiet tensions. Tomorrow, he would speak to Mrs. Penhaligon and return to the bank's archives. For now, his little gray cells were busy at work, unraveling threads that might yet lead him to the truth. The morning sun battled through a thick layer of clouds as Poirot arrived once more at Norwood in Penhaligon. The bank's facade appeared colder, somehow more forbidding under the gray sky, as though the very stones had absorbed the tragedy that had unfolded within. Poirot was met at the door by a stern-faced assistant who led him through marble corridors to a discreet office. There, sat behind an expansive oak desk, was Claudia Penhaligon, the bank's co-partner and heiress, a lady whose very presence drew attention. Her dark eyes were piercing, and her posture carried the grace of someone accustomed to control. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, her voice smooth but distant. "I was informed of your arrival. Madame Penhaligon, thank you for seeing me. I hope I'm not disturbing your affairs." She smiled slightly. Trouble has a way of disturbing itself. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, I desire just clarity. Your name appears in Mr. Norwood's ledger more than once. Would you care to explain?" She eyed him with an opaque gaze. "Mr. Norwood was thorough. We conducted many transactions, and I was often consulted. Perhaps that is why my initials appear frequently. And yet, the sums marked next to your initials are unusually large and often accompanied by notes about discretion." Claudia's eyes flickered. Discretion is a necessary virtue in banking and in life. Poirot leaned forward gently. "Madam, I sense you are hiding something beyond mere financial dealings." She held his gaze steadily. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Very well. There is something you should know. Norwood and I had disagreements, profound ones. He feared I would use the bank's resources for personal gain. I worried he was too careful, too bound by tradition. Did those disagreements escalate? Beyond words, she conceded. There were moments when trust faltered. When I questioned his decisions, he challenged my loyalty. And on the night of his death," she looked away briefly, "I was frustrated and tired, but I would never harm him." Poirot observed the faint tightness in her voice, the imperceptible tightening around her mouth. "Did you notice anything unusual during the dinner?" She paused. Mrs. Norwood was unusually quiet. Richard seemed nervous. And Godfrey March, well, he was distant as ever. Any arguments? None loud enough to disturb the butler. But the air was charged with unspoken grievances. Poirot gave a contemplative nod. "Thank you, madam. We value your candor." After leaving the bank, Poirot made his way to the local archives, a modest building housing records that might hold forgotten clues. The clerk, a bespectacled woman with sharp features, greeted him with practiced efficiency. "I'm investigating the recent death of Charles Norwood," Poirot explained. "I require access to personnel records, specifically relating to the bank and its associates." She nodded, leading him through rows of dusty files. Hours passed as Poirot looked through documents, employment records, correspondence, and financial reports. Slowly, a picture emerged of strained partnerships, secret meetings, and unexplained withdrawals. One letter caught his eye, a terse note from Norwood to Penhaligon, mentioning a matter of utmost urgency and a trust betrayed. Poirot folded the letter carefully. It was a whisper from the past, urging him to look deeper. Returning to his lodgings, Poirot reflected on the complexities entwining Norwood's world. Every thread led back to a web of loyalty, deception, and power. As evening fell, he penned notes for the next day's inquiries. Interviews with Lydia Norwood and Harold Pritchard awaited. The pieces were moving, but the puzzle remained unsolved. Poirot smiled quietly to himself. The little gray cells must work even harder. The heavy oak door of the solicitor's office creaked open, revealing Harold Pritchard seated behind a cluttered desk. The room was filled with the scent of old leather and polished wood, a testament to years of carefully guarded secrets and whispered confidences. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass, casting muted colors across the room. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Pritchard responded with a measured nod. "I have been expecting you." "Thank you for receiving me on such short notice," Poirot replied, taking a seat opposite the solicitor. Pritchard steepled his fingers, his gaze steady. "I understand you have questions about Mr. Norwood's affairs." "Indeed. Your position as a family solicitor puts you in close proximity to these matters." Pritchard sighed softly. "I have served the Norwood family for decades. I knew Charles well, and I have seen the strain these past years have placed upon him. Strain that perhaps went beyond mere business." "Precisely. Mr. Norwood was a man burdened not only by the weight of financial responsibility, but also by personal regrets and delicate entanglements." Poirot leaned in slightly. "Are you referring to the ledger?" The solicitor's eyes flickered. That ledger contained entries of a nature not usually found in such records. Notes on individuals, debts unpaid, promises made and broken. "Did you advise Mr. Norwood on any of these matters?" "As counsel, my duty was to protect his interests. Yet I confess, there were times when I questioned the morality of some transactions." Poirot regarded him keenly. "Transactions that might have made enemies?" Pritchard's lips pushed into a thin line. "Unfortunately, yes. Mr. Norwood's integrity gained him numerous rivals, both within and beyond the bank. And the night of his death, did you observe anything unusual?" "I was present during the dinner. I noticed tension, faint yet palpable. A man's facade cracks in moments of crisis, and I believe we all sense that. Did Mr. Norwood speak of any threats?" "Not directly, but his last correspondence hinted at fear. Fear of betrayal." Poirot tapped his fingers lightly. "What about the paperweight?" "I can say only that such an object, while seemingly innocuous, can become a weapon in the hands of desperation." A quiet descended between them, laden with unspoken truths. Poirot broke it gently. "Do you have knowledge of any meetings or correspondence involving Mrs. Lydia Norwood and either Mr. Daring or Monsieur Valsin?" Pritchard hesitated, then nodded. "Mrs. Norwood has been involved in covert discussions, frequently concealed from public view. Whether these relate to the bank's activities or personal problems is unclear." "Thank you, Monsieur Pritchard. Your confidentiality and honesty are most valuable." Later, Poirot found himself wandering through a small garden behind the solicitor's office, where chrysanthemums bloomed despite the chill. The day's revelations weighed on him, each piece of information like a stone added to a delicate scale. He pondered Mrs. Penhaligon's disguised objectives, Colonel March's aloof demeanor, Ellesmere's uneasiness, Lydia Norwood's guardedness, and now Pritchard's careful confessions. Each was a thread, and Poirot knew well that the tapestry of truth required careful weaving. Back in his hotel room, Poirot arranged his notes attentively. He lined up the facts, the alibis, and the whispers. The ledger's cryptic annotations, the 3 names, the private grievances, and a shattered glass all spoke of more than mere accident. Tomorrow, Poirot would begin his second round of interviews. He intended to revisit each guest, not as a questioner, but as a weaver of subtle psychological pressure. The truth, he knew, was concealed not in loud admissions, but in the gentle changes of a gaze, the hesitancy in words, and the unsaid fear that clings to civility. And Poirot's little gray cells were poised to uncover it all. The next morning dawned damp and heavy with mist, as if the very air was laden with unspoken secrets. Poirot arrived early at the Norwood estate, his footsteps muffled by the soft carpeted halls as he made his way to the drawing room where the 6 guests had congregated the night of the murder. The room had been restored to its customary elegance, but Poirot's quick eyes caught every detail. The little scuff on the corner of the antique table, the faint aroma of cigar smoke lingering in the heavy drapes, the subtle arrangement of chairs now inconspicuously different from the night before. He understood well that this was the stage upon which the drama had unfolded, and every item in the room might yet hold a clue. Soon, the guests began to arrive. The air was thick with polite tension, the kind that comes when one is both visitor and prospective suspect. Each face wore a mask, some more convincing than others. First to enter was Mrs. Lydia Norwood, her expression cool and composed, her eyes flickering briefly to Poirot with a guarded appraisal. She took her usual seat near the window, fingers tightening subtly on the armrest. Next came Richard Ellesmere, the junior partner, who offered a cautious nod before taking a seat opposite Mrs. Penhaligon. Claudia Penhaligon herself approached with a composed grace, her sharp eyes scrutinizing each arrival as though collecting away minute details. Colonel Godfrey March followed, his posture unaffected but his eyes calculated, settling briefly on Poirot with the cool recognition of a man accustomed to surveillance. Lastly, Harold Pritchard, the solicitor, entered with deliberate calm. He took his place near the fireplace, hands folded as though bracing for the inevitable. Poirot rose, a small smile touching his lips. Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for assembling here once more. It is in this place, among familiar surroundings, that the truth will be softly unraveled. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Our late host, Monsieur Charles Norwood, was a man of order and precision. He kept meticulous records, financial and personal. Yet in the hours before his death, something disrupted that order. A clash of wills, perhaps? A secret too fragile to remain hidden. Ellesmere shifted in his seat. Monsieur Poirot, surely you do not suggest that any one of us was responsible for such a thing? Responsibility is a heavy word, Monsieur Ellesmere. Let us rather speak of actions, words, and silences. Poirot's gaze settled on Mrs. Penhaligon. Madam, you appeared troubled the evening of the dinner. Can you explain? Claudia inclined her head, her voice steady. Business is never without its challenges, Monsieur Poirot. But I had no cause for harm. Yet, you and Monsieur Norwood disagreed? Poirot pressed. She paused. We had disagreements, yes. He was cautious, I more progressive. But we were partners. Poirot went on to Mrs. Norwood. Madam, your silence spoke volumes. What burden do you carry? Lydia's eyes darkened. Burden? Perhaps. I was weary of pretense and weary of the man I married. Did you love him? Poirot asked softly. She looked away. Love is a complicated thing. The room held its breath. Turning to Colonel March, Poirot inquired. You returned recently from abroad. Did you detect anything strange among the guests? March's voice was measured. Only the usual tensions of wealth and power. But I noted Monsieur Ellesmere's discomfort. Ellesmere's cheeks flushed. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Monsieur Ellesmere, your unease did not escape my notice. Can you explain the letter you received shortly before the dinner? Ellesmere took a swallow. It was a warning. Anonymous. To be cautious. A warning? Poirot mused. Of what? That I was being watched. That some things would be revealed. Did you share such information with anyone? No. Curious. Poirot then faced Pritchard. As the family solicitor, you had access to many confidences. Were you aware of any disputes that might have escalated? The solicitor's calm facade slipped slightly. There were disputes, yes, between the partners and within the family. Disputes that might lead to violence? No. But tensions might lead to reckless actions. Poirot gave a contemplative nod. And the broken glass? The paperweight? Was this the instrument of chaos? No one admits to throwing the paperweight, Mrs. Penhaligon said, her voice quiet but sharp. But the sound was unmistakable. Indeed, Poirot agreed. A weapon chosen for its noise as much as its heft. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Now, I ask you all to consider this. The ledger found in Monsieur Norwood's possession contained names unknown to most of us, names tied to mysteries buried deep. Why hide such names in a ledger? And what message did Monsieur Norwood wish to leave? A murmur rippled through the room. Poirot repaired them with a look. Answers come not from accusation, but from observation. The smallest slip, a glance too quick, a hesitation in speech, these betray what lies beneath. He moved closer to the window, gazing out for a moment, then turned back. The game has begun, Amos, and it is my task to watch, to listen, and to discern the truth hidden beneath the polished veneer. The suspects exchanged uncertain looks. The atmosphere swelled, the invisible strands tightening. Poirot's little gray cells were alert, ready to untangle the knot. The evening descended on the Norwood estate like a curtain of thick velvet, muffling the sounds of the world beyond its wrought iron gates. Inside the grand drawing room, the gas lamps cast warm, flickering pools of light against the dark paneling, creating a chiaroscuro of shadows and subtle glints on the polished surfaces. It was the kind of room where whispers held weight, and silence spoke louder than words. Hercule Poirot sat near the fireplace, his fingers steepled beneath his sharp chin as he pondered the events that had transpired. Each interview, each observation, had been a step along a labyrinthine path. The ledger's cryptic names, the fractured relationships, the tension thick as London fog, all pieces of a puzzle more intricate than a simple crime of passion. He was not alone in the room. Inspector Hargrove leaned against a side table, his broad frame tense, his gaze distant but attentive. The constable was a man of action, frustrated by the delicate dance of Poirot's psychological investigations, but respectful of the results they yielded. "It's more complicated than I thought," Hargrove admitted. "Nothing is as straightforward as the evidence first suggests." "Ah, monsieur, that is the nature of human nature," Poirot replied with a gentle smile. "We are creatures of nuance and contradiction. The truth is rarely a single, clear thread. It is a tapestry woven from many." The door opened quietly. Claudia Penhaligon entered, her form outlined by the dim hallway light. Her keen eyes held a mixture of indignation and tiredness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "you wish to speak with me again?" "Madame," Poirot responded, standing, "your insights have proven invaluable. There is, however, a matter I must clarify." He gestured to a low chair. She sat, fingers laced tightly. "The ledger indicates your involvement in certain transactions marked discreet. Could you explain their nature?" Claudia's gaze sharpened. They were loans extended to individuals outside the usual purview, friends and acquaintances who needed assistance. Assistance in financial matters? Indeed, but with hopes beyond mere repayment. Poirot's eyes glittered. And what expectations might those be? She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Loyalty. Silence." The detective nodded. "Very well. And what of your relationship with Lydia Norwood?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "We maintained a professional distance. Our interests did not always align. And yet, on that evening, tensions between you were palpable." Claudia's voice dropped. "Mrs. Norwood is a complex woman. Jealous, perhaps. Protective of her position. Did you perceive her as a threat?" "Possibly, but I would never harm Charles." Poirot's eyes lingered. Yet the shattered glass and the brass paperweight suggest otherwise. She gave a thin smile. "Objects can speak louder than words, but not always the truth." Before Poirot could react, a faint noise sounded from the corridor. The butler appeared, delivering a folded piece of parchment. "From Monsieur Poirot. Found in the library this afternoon." Poirot unwrapped it gently. The handwriting was hasty, the ink smeared. "Beware the friend who smiles too easily. Trust is a fragile thread, and betrayal comes dressed in familiar clothes." No signature. A chill passed through the room. Claudia's eyes widened. Who would leave such a note? Poirot's expression hardened. "That is what we shall discover." Later, in the quiet seclusion of his apartment, Poirot examined the note by lamplight. The words spoke of duplicity, yet the handwriting was unfamiliar. A warning or taunt. He recalled the subtle glances exchanged at the dinner table, the half-uttered sentences, and the evasions. His thoughts turned to Thomas Daring. The miner, he mused aloud. Each man and woman at that table carries secrets, some financial, some far more personal. The ledger is a map, but the true path lies in the hearts and minds of those who gathered. He closed his eyes, imagining the dinner once more, the polite smiles, the nervous glances, the quiet tensions. Tomorrow, he would speak to Mrs. Penhaligon and return to the bank's archives. For now, his little gray cells were busy at work, unraveling threads that might yet lead him to the truth. The morning sun battled through a thick layer of clouds as Poirot arrived once more at Norwood in Penhaligon. The bank's facade appeared colder, somehow more forbidding under the gray sky, as though the very stones had absorbed the tragedy that had unfolded within. Poirot was met at the door by a stern-faced assistant who led him through marble corridors to a discreet office. There, sat behind an expansive oak desk, was Claudia Penhaligon, the bank's co-partner and heiress, a lady whose very presence drew attention. Her dark eyes were piercing, and her posture carried the grace of someone accustomed to control. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, her voice smooth but distant. "I was informed of your arrival. Madame Penhaligon, thank you for seeing me. I hope I'm not disturbing your affairs." She smiled slightly. Trouble has a way of disturbing itself. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, I desire just clarity. Your name appears in Mr. Norwood's ledger more than once. Would you care to explain?" She eyed him with an opaque gaze. "Mr. Norwood was thorough. We conducted many transactions, and I was often consulted. Perhaps that is why my initials appear frequently. And yet, the sums marked next to your initials are unusually large and often accompanied by notes about discretion." Claudia's eyes flickered. Discretion is a necessary virtue in banking and in life. Poirot leaned forward gently. "Madam, I sense you are hiding something beyond mere financial dealings." She held his gaze steadily. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Very well. There is something you should know. Norwood and I had disagreements, profound ones. He feared I would use the bank's resources for personal gain. I worried he was too careful, too bound by tradition. Did those disagreements escalate? Beyond words, she conceded. There were moments when trust faltered. When I questioned his decisions, he challenged my loyalty. The balance must be restored. Past obligations demand their recompense. The silence of the ledger conveys a powerful message." Poirot's finger stroked the words gently. The statement, "balance must be restored," rang emotionally. It was a metaphor, a warning, and even a confession all at once. He carefully scrutinized the letter's margins, detecting a slight fingerprint smear, one that showed the modest arch of a well-practiced hand. Poirot put the note into his pocket and left the vault, his mind awhirl with possibilities. Later that afternoon, Poirot arrived at a quaint townhouse on the outskirts of London, where the elusive Monsieur Valsin was said to reside. The house was modest, with ivy crawling along its brick facade and a garden that seemed to have been neglected for some time. Poirot rang the bell, the sound echoing faintly against the silent neighborhood. After a brief wait, the door opened to reveal a man in his early 60s, tall and gaunt, with piercing eyes that bore into Poirot's very soul. "Monsieur Valsin, I presume," Poirot answered with a polite nod. "Indeed," the man replied, his voice smooth but guarded. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Poirot stepped inside, noting the sparse but tasteful furnishings. "I seek answers regarding the late Charles Norwood and a ledger that contains your name." Valsin's expression clenched. Norwood was a difficult man. Our commercial dealings were complex enough to lead to death. Poirot's question hung in the air. Valsin did not respond immediately. Instead, he gestured toward a leather armchair. "Please sit. There are truths you must comprehend before pronouncing judgment." As Poirot seated himself, Valsin spoke slowly, picking his words with care. "Mr. Norwood and I were bound by more than contracts. We shared secrets, financial and personal, that could ruin us both if revealed. Secrets such as, a large sum of money vanished from one of our joint ventures. Suspicion fell upon me, but the truth was far more tangled. Do you admit guilt? Valson's eyes darkened. Guilt is a heavy cloak, but I wore it for reasons of loyalty and protection. Poirot's interest deepened. Protection of whom? Of those closest to us. Sometimes, sacrifice is necessary to shield the innocent. And the ledger? It was a record not just of debts, but of promises, some broken, some kept in silence. Poirot pondered the implications. What about the paperweight? Valson's gaze sharpened. An unfortunate instrument, one I neither wielded nor desired. Yet it brought an end to Mr. Norwood. Indeed, and yet, perhaps it was not the paperweight alone, but the weight of his own conscience. Returning to the Norwood estate, Poirot found the atmosphere more tense than before. The guests had grown restless, the walls appearing to close in with each passing hour. He gathered them once more in the drawing room, the flickering fire casting long shadows. My friends, Poirot began, we have heard much, accounts, denials, half-truths. Yet the core of this riddle beats behind these layers. He looked at each in turn, his gaze steady and commanding. The ledger, the letter from Valson and Company, and the paperweight are threads in a greater tapestry. Charles Norwood was ensnared not just by external enemies, but by his own burdened conscience. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Tonight, we peel back the veils of secrecy. We examine the motives, the opportunities, and the subtle deceptions. As he spoke, Poirot's eyes caught a flicker of movement near the door. The butler, ever discreet, appeared with a tray bearing a single envelope. Poirot took it, noting the unusual handwriting. An anonymous note, he replied, unfolding the paper. The message was brief but chilling. The truth is a mirror shattered. Each shard reflects a lie. A hush fell over the room. Poirot folded the note carefully. The game deepens, he mumbled, and the solution draws near. The morning light was pale and diffused, as if reluctant to intrude upon the heavy shadows that clung to the Norwood estate. Poirot awakened with a clarity born of purpose, the events of the past days weaving themselves into a complex tapestry of human reasons and secret aspirations. Today, he would delve further into the lives of individuals enmeshed in the tragedy, each thread pulling tighter, threatening to reveal the twisted reality. His first visit was to Mrs. Lydia Norwood. The younger wife greeted him in her sitting room, a space filled with muted colors and delicate china. Her posture was straight, but her eyes betrayed a glimmer of vulnerability, a look beneath the well-crafted veneer. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I am prepared to answer your questions. Thank you, madam. It is typically in the subtleties where truth resides. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. Tell me, did your husband confide in you about his concerns in the days before his death? Lydia hesitated, then nodded. He spoke of debts and betrayals. He thought the bank was being damaged from within. By whom? She glanced away. I do not know, but he mentioned the name of a man, Thomas Daring. Ah, the clerk whose name appears in the ledger. Indeed, Charles distrusted him. Did you see Mr. Daring recently? Only once at the dinner. He seemed nervous. Poirot leaned in. And you, madam? Were there difficulties between you and your husband? A glimmer of emotion touched her face. Perhaps. He was a man of rigid principles. I sometimes felt trapped. Trapped how? In his shadow, in the expectations of society. It was a gilded cage. Poirot nodded. Thank you, Madame Norwood. We value your candor. Next, Poirot sought Thomas Daring at modest lodgings near the financial district. The young man's appearance was disheveled, his demeanor anxious. Mr. Daring, Poirot began, your name featured heavily in Mr. Norwood's private documents. Would you care to explain? Daring swallowed hard. I was involved in some irregularities. Not by choice, but necessity. Necessity. I was pressured to cover shortfalls, to manipulate figures. By whom? Daring's eyes darted nervously. by Madame Penhaligon's associates. They wanted to protect the bank's reputation. And did you comply willingly? No, but I dreaded losing everything. Poirot's eyes grew piercing. Fear can be a powerful motivator. Indeed. Did you attend the dinner? Indeed. I was uneasy. I feared something might happen. What? A confrontation. A revelation. Poirot absorbed the confession. Did you see or hear anything unusual that evening? A loud argument between Mr. Norwood and Mrs. Penhaligon. What about the paperweight? Daring paled. I was near the study when a glass broke, but I did not see who caused it. Poirot nodded, feeling a deeper struggle within the young guy. Poirot's final visit of the day was to the modest flat of Harold Pritchard. The solicitor welcomed him with a faint smile, his demeanor calm but guarded. Monsieur Poirot, to what do I owe this pleasure? I seek clarity, Monsieur Pritchard. The ledger, the conflicts, and the terrible end of Charles Norwood. Pritchard sighed. I have kept many secrets for the Norwoods. Some I regret. Regret. There were whispers of debts concealed, of deals made in shadows. Charles sought to protect the family, but at great personal cost. Did you advise him to take such measures? Only to be cautious. But I fear caution became entanglement. Was there fear of exposure? Always. Poirot leaned forward. And the night of the murder? An evening of strained patience. A final clash of wills. Do you suspect any of the guests? Suspect? No. But I know that beneath civility lies a reservoir of resentment. Poirot rose. Thank you, monsieur. Your discretion and insight are highly valuable. That evening, Poirot convened a private meeting with Inspector Hargrove and his closest confidant, Hastings. The three sat around a little table covered with notes and photographs. Poirot's eyes glittered with purpose. The web tightens. We have uncovered secrets of financial mismanagement, personal betrayal, and hidden motives. Each guest carries a piece of the puzzle. Hastings seemed bewildered. But who struck the fatal blow? That, mon ami, is the question. And the answer lies not only in what was done, but why. Inspector Hargrove rubbed his chin. There's a pattern to the ledger entries and the tensions. Someone was desperate to protect their interests. And willing to kill, Poirot added quietly. He studied the faces of his companions, weighing their reactions. The game is far from over. The parts are shifting. Soon, the truth will disclose itself. Late that night, as rain pattered softly against the window panes, Poirot sat in reverie. The flickering candlelight danced across his sharp features as he methodically pieced together the fragments. The ledger, the secret meetings, the shattered glass, the mysterious paperweight, all spoke of a tragedy born not only of greed, but of fear and fractured trust. He gave a small smile. The little gray cells will have their answer. The day had grown heavy with anticipation when Hercule Poirot summoned all the principal guests to the grand drawing room of the Norwood estate. The room, meticulously restored to its pre-murder state, now bore attention as palpable as the polished silver on the sideboard. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the richly woven carpet, patterns that seemed to echo the intricate web of secrets that had bound these 6 souls together. One by one, the guests entered, their faces a careful blend of curiosity, wariness, and concealed anxiety. Lydia Norwood sat stiffly near the window, hands folded in her lap, while Claudia Penhaligon's sharp eyes scanned the room, never lingering too long. Richard Ellesmere appeared more composed than before, though the faint tremor in his hands betrayed his nerves. Colonel Godfrey March leaned against the mantelpiece, his military bearing unshaken but his eyes alert. Harold Pritchard, the solicitor, settled into an armchair near the hearth, his expression unreadable. Poirot stood before them, small yet commanding, a figure of impeccable poise and quiet intensity. He surveyed the assembly with a measured gaze, the little gray cells working swiftly beneath his calm exterior. Mesdames et messieurs, he started, his voice clear and methodical. We are gathered here not merely to revisit a tragic event, but to unveil the truth that has eluded us. the truth that lies beneath the carefully maintained facades and behind the whispered conversations. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink. Our late host, Monsieur Charles Norwood, was a man of impeccable order. His ledger, private and secret, was a testament to this order. Yet within it lay three names, mysterious and significant. Poirot's eyes fastened on Mrs. Penhaligon. Madame Claudia Penhaligon, you appeared frequently beside those names, linked to matters marked discreet. What was your role in these transactions? Claudia met his eyes steadily. Monsieur Poirot, my involvement was strictly professional. These were loans extended to trusted acquaintances, with the understanding that discretion was paramount. Discretion, yes, Poirot murmured. But what are the expectations beyond repayment? Loyalty and silence, perhaps. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to Richard Ellesmere. Monsieur Ellesmere, you received a warning before the dinner. Did you suspect that some among us wished to protect secrets at any cost? Ellesmere swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. I feared for the bank, for the reputations involved. But I never imagined it would come to murder. And yet, you were near the study when the fatal glass was broken. He nodded, eyes downcast. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Lydia Norwood. Madam, your silence during the dinner was notable. What burden do you carry? Lydia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I loved Charles in my way, but I knew his burdens were heavy. I was wary of the shadows between us. Shadows that conceal much, Poirot said. Colonel March moved forward. I have served my country for decades. I know the cost of secrets and the dangers they bring. Yet, Colonel, you seemed detached, watching as the drama unfolded. Detachment is survival. Finally, Poirot faced Harold Pritchard. Monsieur Pritchard, as solicitor, you were privy to many confidences. Did you know of any threats to Monsieur Norwood? The solicitor's eyes flashed. Threats, yes. From those who coveted power, from those who feared exposure. Poirot gave a soft smile. And the paperweight, an instrument of finality? No one would admit to wielding it, but its symbolism is clear. Poirot stepped forward, a tiny gleam in his eye. Now, let us speak of the ledger and its names. Mrs. Avis Brentwood, the widow, was connected to Mr. Norwood's past in ways the others were unaware. He paused as if measuring the room's breadth. She was not a guest at the dinner, yet her influence was felt. Her late husband's assets and debts twisted through the bank's weak fabric. Poirot held up a photograph. This man, Henri Vernier, once close to Mr. Norwood, disappeared years ago. Yet his shadow lingered. A murmur rippled through the room. Poirot continued. Monsieur Valsin, the Swiss investor, brought pressure and threats. His letters carried veiled warnings of balance to be restored. He set the final piece on the table. The paperweight did not fall by chance. It was a weapon wielded in desperation by one who saw their world unravel. Poirot's attention concentrated on Claudia Penhaligon. Madam, you wish to protect your interests, to maintain your power within the bank. Her composure faltered, but it was Monsieur Ellesmere, driven by fear and ambition, who struck the blow when confrontation became inevitable. Ellesmere gasped, eyes wide with shock. Poirot's voice softened. Yet, this was not merely a crime of passion or greed. It was a tragedy formed of loyalty, betrayal, and the crushing weight of secrets. He turned to the others. Each of you bears responsibility, for silence can be as deadly as the knife. The room fell into stunned silence. Poirot smiled faintly. The game is played not only with weapons, but with words and wills. As the constables went to take Ellesmere away, Poirot surveyed the scene critically. He strolled outdoors into the cooler evening, the street lamps throwing long shadows. To solve a mystery, he mused, one must understand the hearts behind the masks. And with that, Hercule Poirot walked quietly into the night, his little gray cell satisfied for now. The morning following the arrest of Richard Ellesmere was wrapped in a melancholy quietude that seemed to hang upon the entire estate. The formerly vivacious drawing room where the guests had congregated for that fateful meal now felt hollow, as though the very air lamented the loss of innocence and trust. The sunlight crept faintly through the large windows, leaving long shadows that stretched like mute witnesses across the polished floor. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, staring out over the groomed gardens, his mind a frenzy of thoughts and reflections. The events of the past days had revealed a complex web of ambition, loyalty, deceit, and fear. Yet, beneath it all, Poirot recognized the perennial human frailties that so often precipitate tragedy. Madame Norwood arrived slowly, her posture still royal despite the clear exhaustion engraved upon her face. She approached Poirot with a tentative grace, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow in her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she began softly, "I cannot thank you enough for unveiling the truth. It is a burden lifted, though the wounds remain." Poirot turned to her with soft tenderness. "Madame, it is not merely truth that heals, but understanding. In uncovering what lies behind, we begin the journey of forgiveness." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "And yet, I wonder if some secrets are better left buried." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but the silence of secrets often breeds poison. Better to bring light, however painful, than to linger in darkness." As she left, Poirot reflected on the other players in this tragic drama. Claudia Penhaligon, whose ambition had torn a breach between partnership and friendship. Colonel March, whose aloof attitude hid a profound loneliness. Harold Pritchard, who had walked the delicate line between guidance and complicity. Each had been trapped in the consequences of choices taken long before the terrible evening. Later, Poirot met with Inspector Hargrove in the study, now emptied of the earlier tension, but heavy with residual melancholy. "Do you believe justice has been served?" the inspector asked. Poirot thought. "Justice is a delicate balance, Inspector. The law can punish acts, but the human heart is less easily judged. Monsieur Ellesmere's confession is a piece of the puzzle, but the true verdict is lived, not pronounced." Hargrove sighed. "It's never simple, is it?" "Never," Poirot agreed. That afternoon, Poirot visited Mrs. Avis Brentwood. The widow received him in her modest parlor, the room adorned with faded photographs and worn furniture. Her eyes held a quiet strength, tempered by years of hardship. "I wish to thank you for your courage," Poirot said. "Your past connection to Monsieur Norwood shed light upon much." She smiled slightly. "Courage is a luxury I cannot afford, but perhaps the truth is a balm." They spoke of losses and regrets, of the weight of silence, and of the hope for redemption. Returning to his quarters that evening, Poirot drafted a letter to Madame Norwood, giving words of comfort and wisdom. He understood that the path forward would be difficult, but that with time, wounds might heal. As the city lights flickered on and the rain began anew, Poirot settled into his favorite armchair, pipe in hand. His thoughts turned inward, contemplating the nature of humanity. The frailties that drive men and women to actions both noble and tragic. "The little gray cells," he murmured, "have done their work. Yet the true mystery is in the hearts they illuminate." With that, Hercule Poirot closed his eyes, allowing the steady rhythm of the rain to ease the mind of the world's most careful detective. The following morning dawned gray and cool, a soft mist curling over the manicured lawns of the Norwood estate. The air was heavy with a quiet that was neither sorrowful nor joyful, but pregnant with the weight of consequences. Hercule Poirot, beautifully dressed as ever, stood by the big bay window of his rented room, watching the delicate movements of servants preparing the house for the day's renewed bustle. The case was nearing its close. However, Poirot's mind remained far from satisfied. The truth had been revealed. Richard Ellesmere's confession had laid bare the fatal act that had ended Charles Norwood's life, but the echoes of the crime lingered in every shadow and silence. He reflected on the threads that had woven this complex tapestry: ambition, loyalty, betrayal, fear, and regret. The microscopic gray cells had untangled the logic of events, but the human heart remained as enigmatic as ever. Poirot's reverie was broken by a soft knock at the door. Madame Maigret entered, bearing a little tray with his morning coffee and fresh pastries. Her presence was a balm, a reminder of the basic constancies despite life's complications. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot," she greeted cordially. "The day promises clarity." "Merci, Madame Maigret," Poirot replied, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. Indeed, the final act awaits. Later that day, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the remaining guests had gathered for what he called the final curtain. The atmosphere was charged yet subdued. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, and the warm glow of lamps softened the edges of the room. Poirot stood before them, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he started, "we have journeyed through shadows and silences to arrive at a truth, painful yet necessary. It is time to unravel the final threads." He spoke slowly, painstakingly tying together the information, the observations, and the nuanced human relationships. Charles Norwood was a man bound by principle, yet vulnerable to the ambitions and fears of those around him. His ledger was not only a financial record, but also a history of trust and betrayal. Poirot's gaze traveled across the room. "Madame Penhaligon, your desire to protect the bank and your interests created tensions that fractured alliances. Your dealings were discreet, yet they sowed seeds of resentment." Claudia met his eyes, mute but unyielding. "Mrs. Norwood, your reserved manner veiled deep pains. The marriage was stressed by secrets and unmet expectations." Lydia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Colonel March, your distance was a shield, but you observed much, more than you let on." The colonel nodded solemnly. "You were the keeper of confidences in your capacity as a solicitor, Harold Pritchard. Yet, even secrets can become weapons." The solicitor's face betrayed a flicker of regret. Poirot turned to Richard Ellesmere. "Monsieur Ellesmere, your fear and ambition culminated in a tragic act. The paperweight was a sign of desperation as much as a weapon." Ellesmere's shoulders slumped as he looked directly into Poirot's eyes. However, this was not a straightforward act of avarice or passion. It was a tragedy intertwined with ambition and fear, loyalty and treachery. Poirot's tone grew softer. A deeper fracture was indicated by the broken glass, the whispered warnings, and the hidden ledger. He took a moment to let the seriousness of his remarks sink in. Ultimately, mercy must be used to temper justice. We must keep in mind the humanity underlying the actions, but the law will have its way. The only sound in the room was the slight crackle of the fire. Poirot smiled softly as he finished. "Wills and words are used in addition to weapons in this game. I hope this teaches us all something." Poirot lingered as the guests left, thinking about the intricacy of the human heart and the brittleness of trust. Once alive with the flurry of ambition, the estate now exuded a calm that was both melancholy and peaceful. Later, Poirot stopped at the opulent doorway as he was about to depart from the Norwood estate. The falling leaves were agitated and swirled in golden eddies by the autumn breeze. He tightened his coat and turned around again. He pondered. To solve a mystery is to look into the soul of humanity, and to understand that there is a story waiting to be told behind every mask. The next mystery that awaited his tiny gray cells was already on Hercule Poirot's mind as he strolled into the waning light.